So now there's two key points I want to make here right at the beginning, and I hope 6 weeks from now, 6 months from now, maybe even 6 years from now, you will remember at least these points. And the first is a really important one. No matter how good your message is, the target audience will overlook, ignore it, or forget it most of the time. Most of the time, your messages just don't get through. And rookies tend to get their feelings hurt by this, but pros in the business like myself, we know this is coming, we expect it, and we plan for it. And what we're going to talk about today is how you overcome that by trying to reach your audience several different ways at the same time, and how to measure how well these attempts are working so you can steadily improve over time. Please remember at least those two things 6 weeks from now, and I will call this seminar a success. And so let's do a quick warm-up just to get you into the spirit of that first point. I've got 42 people on the line here. A few of them are still named Laura Gaines, but not all of them. 42 people on the line here. Hit the yes button if you remember the top headline on your local newspaper today. The #1 headline on your local newspaper today. Hit the yes button if you remember what that is. Don't cheat. Nobody has hit the yes button.
Eric, I don't think we have a yes button. Do we?
You don't see a yes button?
Yes, there's
under the participant list?
Yes, there's
it's
a yes
there.
button.
I see one person has hit yes, and one person has hit no. 3 people have hit no. One person has hit yes. I'm going to clear it. Let's try the next one. How many Facebook ads can you remember? That's the key word, remember, from the past week. If you can remember more than 3, because you probably saw dozens, would you hit the yes button if you can remember more than 3? Two people say yes, 8 people say no. $11 no, 2 yes. Clear that. If you can remember more than 3 pieces of direct mail that you received in the past week, could you hit the yes button? We're doing a little better on the direct mail. Look at that. We're doing a little bit better on the direct mail, but still a lot of people not recognizing that. The last time you gassed up your car, there was an ad on that pump. We call it a pump topper. If you can remember what it was for, let me see you drop it in the chat. What was the pump topper ad? Only one yes, a lot of no's. Nobody is dropping anything in the chat. Goodness gracious. One person reckoned ice cream was on sale at Stewart's. Maybe cheddar. Okay. So all of this helps make my key point. It's really hard to get your attention, isn't it? They put stuff in the newspaper. They send it in the mail. They put it on your Facebook feed. They put it in front of you while you're pumping your gas. And you guys on the line are like, I don't know. I don't remember. I didn't notice. It didn't stick. Well, now, of course, the reverse is true. It is hard for you to get their attention. When it's your Facebook ad, an article about you in the newspaper, your piece of mail dropping in their mailbox, that same thing is going to happen. A lot of people just aren't going to notice. They aren't going to register. It is going to just disappear into the ether without making a mark. That's just how it goes. And this is what John Wanamaker was referring to, and he said his famous slogan, "I know that half my advertising is wasted. I just don't know which half." And now John Wanamaker is remembered as the father of modern marketing. You might remember him as the Wanamaker department store, one of the pioneers in the notion of department stores. And they've got this giant department store down in Philly. It's a Macy's now, but that was his thing. And John Wanamaker was one of the first people in marketing to recognize that just because you mail them something, just because you put something in the newspaper, just because you say something on the radio, doesn't mean that it's getting through and people notice. And he is a pioneer in trying to figure out what was working. And particularly, he is remembered for creating the notion of a coupon. And he would put one coupon in one newspaper and put another coupon in a different newspaper and count how many coupons came back. And that would tell him which newspapers are people reading and which ones is he getting his money worth for his advertising. He was one of the first people to try and evaluate in some quantitative way how well his marketing efforts were performing. And I want you to imagine that John Wanamaker's hovering over this webinar today telling you, figure it out, figure it out. A lot of it's not going to work. That's just how it goes, but some of it will. And if you figure it out, you can get better over time. And so what we're going to do in this session is I'm going to introduce you to something called the slope, which channels John Wanamaker's thinking and helps you learn how to evaluate your message going out and make smarter choices about how that's done. And so that was our orientation exercise, and then I'm going to introduce you next. This is our agenda for the day, by the way, to 4 terms of art that you need to know to do outreach at a higher level than maybe you're doing right now. I'm not going to throw a lot of marketing jargon at you during this session, but I got to give you a little bit. Then we'll do an exercise called What Went Wrong, and then we'll spend a little bit more time with all the terms of art, and we'll wrap up. So here are the 4 terms of art. You can write these down or take notes. These are important things to know. And the first one is, and I did not make up these words. These are not special words that we made up over here. These are widely used by professionals in marketing, public relations, communication, fundraising, campaigning, advertising, you name it. These are the words. And the first is target audience, which is the people that you're going to spend your time and your money to try and reach. The second key term there is impression. Impression, which is how that message gets delivered to your target audience. The third key term is conversion, which is how the audience responds to your message in a way that you know about it, and that's key. They respond and you know about it. And finally, the last key term is that cultivation, which is how you stay in touch and hopefully nurture the relationship that began with the conversion. And I'm going to go through all of these terms at some links here today. You'll have a good idea of what they mean by the time that I'm done. But these terms are the basic fundamentals of successful communication programs, and you need to know them. You're going to run into them again and again if you really try and do this work. Now, what is a special waterword thing is to place all this on this chart right here, which goes from left to right, and it is a way that you can think about your outreach, marketing, and communications activities. And it starts with the target audience. That is the starting place for planning a good, successful outreach effort. And so you see in this graphic a key concept here. Here's the messenger with the little megaphone. And the message is for these 5 people in the target. And the message is not for these 6 people outside of the target. Target audience. What happens next is the impressions. the radio ads, the newspaper spots, the pump toppers, the things in the mail, the things in social media, the emails, the Goodyear blimps, all of the different ways that they try and get your attention. And you see that it takes a whole lot of these to get a few conversions, because most of the time those messages are overlooked, forgotten, or ignored. The same way all of you overlooked, forgot, or ignored all those things I was asking you about at the start of the session, the people out there are going to overlook, ignore, and forget the messages that you try to send them. But if you have enough impressions, you will get a few conversions. Most of those people will agree to be cultivated, and some of them will go on to do big things for your organization. So now we're going to do a little exercise, and I'm going to put you into breakout rooms for this. So these are going to be smaller group sessions with 5 or 6 people. I'm going to make it 7 people in each group, and you can discuss it amongst yourselves. And so now the way the exercise is going to work is you are going to meet some individuals, and I want you to imagine we were trying to reach those individuals. Imagine that your organization is trying to reach those people, and in some way it was unsuccessful. So what went wrong? Was it a target audience mismatch? We made the wrong choice for delivering our message to the target audience. Was it an impression? The target audience overlooked, forgot, or ignored our message. Was it a conversion problem? The target audience didn't know how to respond, or they gave up after trying. Or was it a cultivation problem? We failed to contact the target audience again after they first responded. And here's how we're going to do this exercise. I'm going to send you a link in the chat. Here it comes. And I'm going to put you into small groups here in just a minute. But here's what you're going to see. So here's the first thing. Let me make this a little bigger. This gentleman, this older gentleman here says, "Did I see your video on TikTok? I've never seen anything on TikTok." So what went wrong? Target audience mismatch, impression, conversion, cultivation. Well, we put our message out to the world on TikTok. Older people tend to not use TikTok. What went wrong is a target audience mismatch. And I'm going to put you into small groups so you can all do this together. And you're going to do this. I've got quite a few things that you can do this answer for. So I'm going to put you into small groups. I'll let you do this together. And I'm going to give you 7 minutes. Here we go. You'll get a little pop-up on your screen to accept going into the small room. And then when you do, please take yourself off mute so you can chat amongst yourselves. Welcome back, everybody. Let's do a quick check-in and see how that went. So this woman right here is driving down the road. Your ad comes on the radio, and what happens? She's yelling at her kids in the back seat, and she doesn't hear it. Or she's driving down the road, and your ad comes on the radio, and she's texting and driving, and she doesn't notice it. She's driving down the road, your ad comes on the radio, she hears it, and she promptly forgets about it. That's what's going to happen most of the time, and that's the impression issue. It doesn't mean that you did anything wrong. That's just what's going to happen most of the time. Now, let's say you've got a volunteer event, and this gentleman, whose computer is none too recent, is having a hard time filling out the registration form, and he becomes very frustrated and maybe gives up. That point where they can't register, can't complete the purchase, can't make the donation, can't find it, can't finish it, is a conversion problem. And here we are at the volunteer event, and this woman figured out how to complete that registration form. She had a nice time volunteering at your river cleanup, and nobody ever got in touch with her to ask her to come out to another one, or to come to a fundraising dinner, or to come to anything else. That is a cultivation problem. Now, we got through to this guy. We put out our report card on the lake, and we gave the lake a D+. Not very good. And he's obviously very upset about it, but somehow there's no next step for him to take. He can't donate. He can't sign a petition. He can't volunteer. He gets this heap of bad news about the lake. It makes him very upset, and then there's no follow-through at all, which means that tomorrow another piece of bad news will come along, and he will forget all about the D+ on the lake. That is a conversion problem. We got through to him, we made an impression, and then that was the end of it. This woman right here says, I don't remember getting an email from you about silt fences and construction BMPs. I just don't remember. Maybe it went to her spam filter. Maybe she deleted it by mistake. Maybe she opened it up and looked at it and forgot about it. That is an impression problem. This woman right here saw pollution in the New York harbor, called to report it. Nobody ever called her back. Next time, even if the harbor's on fire, she won't even bother. That is a cultivation problem. We just lost a watchdog because we never got back to her. This woman right here is reading a fundraising letter. She's reading it, she's considering it, she's not sold. That's an impression problem. This person signed a petition to clean up the Hudson River. We never told him how it turned out. He's not going to sign our next petition. That's a cultivation problem. We wanted to get this farmer's attention about our environmentally friendly agricultural practices, and we got it in an environmental blog, or we got an article in an environmental newsletter, but he doesn't read these kinds of blogs or newsletters. That's a target audience mismatch. Last one. This woman read our article about native plants, and she thought it was pretty cool, but she didn't know how to get started. And that is a conversion problem. Now, of course, we're focusing all the negatives right here. This is all about all the different places where these things go wrong. But if you've been doing any kind of outreach for a conservation organization, at some point along the way, I bet you've seen some of these things. We are talking to ourselves or putting messages out in places where we would see them rather than the people we want to reach would see them. We anticipate that because it's out there, everybody saw it. We don't have any way for them to act on the information that we put out there. Or if they get involved with our organization in some simple way, we never get back in touch with them again. These kinds of mistakes are very common across our sector. So let's spend a little bit more time on these terms of art, starting with the target audience. Defining the target audience is really critical to running successful, high-performing outreach projects. You've only got so much time, and you've only got so much money, and there's millions and millions of people you could reach. Who is it that you're really trying to reach? The better your answer to that question, the more successful your outreach is likely to be. This is maybe the hardest part for conservation professionals to get their arms around, because in our community, we define our work around these topics. We define our work around stormwater runoff, or we define it around watershed management, define it around the climate, biodiversity, on and on and on. We have all these topics and these issues. This conference is organized around topics and issues. We go to universities that are organized around departments. But marketing outreach is actually organized around types of people. This is your top level concept. Terms like farmers along the creek, potential major donors, activists around the state, boaters and anglers who use the lake, residents near the toxic waste site, concerned citizens in the county, businesses that have to comply with this new regulation. These are all very clear, solid, actionable definitions of an audience. And if you can define your audience precisely like this, you've taken the first step towards reaching them successfully. And I got a couple of examples here for you. Let's imagine we have a drug take-back program. We don't want you to flush all your unused drugs down the toilet, because then they'll end up in the river. We want you to bring them to our take-back program. Now, if I've got time to call one editor of one magazine and say, hey, would you like to write an article about our drug take-back program, because we want to keep all these drugs out of the river, would I call the editor of AARP magazine, or would I call the editor of Off-Road magazine? Let me see your thoughts in the chat. Which readership is a better target for a drug take-back program? And I'm seeing everybody's picking the AARP. And the reason for that is a simple one. Older folks are more likely to be taking drugs than younger folks. This audience, we don't know the age. This one seems like a better use of our time. Now, if I had all the time in the world, why not call both? But I never have all the time in the world. I want to pick my best ones first. So now let's imagine we've got time to do we have one free evening next week, one free evening to make a presentation about how to install a rain barrel. Would I want to take my one free evening and spend it with the garden club, or would I want to spend it with the Elks Lodge? And I see it's coming in for the garden club. It's an obvious reason. They have a use for the water. Now, there's no harm in presenting it to the Elks Lodge. Certainly no harm in that. But if I've only got one evening, I'll probably get more rain barrels put in talking to the garden club than the Elks Lodge. Last one of these exercises. Let's imagine we've got a pump out program for recreational boats. If you've got a toilet on your boat, don't empty the toilet into the harbor. Just let us know and we'll pump all that sewage out and we'll keep it out of the harbor. And there are two local businesses that think that's a great idea. And they've both said, we'll let you call our customers and tell them about the pump out program. That's great. Which list would you call first? The people who are keeping their boat at a local marina, or the people who shop at West Marine? Which one of these is going to be a better choice? I see people popping in and saying the local marina. Yeah. Now, both of these are really pretty good audiences, no question about it. But these folks, we know they've got boats. There are people who shop at West Marine who don't. I shop at West Marine. I have a kayak. There's no head to pump out on my kayak. The people who keep boats at the marina are more likely to have that need. And so let's do a little, the next link here is for the target audiences. And I'm going to go ahead and click on that so you can see it. I'm going to keep everybody in the main room for this one. So there's your link right there in the chat. How well defined are these target audiences? And you'll see your list. And I want you to pick, is that audience very well defined, somewhat well defined, somewhat poorly defined, or who are we reaching? And I'll give you a couple minutes to do that. I'll be able to see how many answers are coming in. Oops, that's the wrong one. They're coming in. All right, with 35 responses, I'm going to go ahead and discuss. Let's see what we come up with. So people, who are we reaching? Everybody, who are we reaching? Thank you for recognizing that that's just not a good enough definition to really get started on a serious and successful outreach program. And yet I hear that all the time. We want everybody to be aware of this, or we want to reach people about that. And whenever a client or a nonprofit or a conservation organization starts using that language, they are telling me very clearly that if they're going to be successful, we're going to have to help them be a lot more specific. Like this one here, individuals in our county with a history of donating to local charities. We know where they are and we know what activity we are interested in. That's a good audience definition. Parents of students in the county school system is somewhat well defined, yes, because we don't know what specific type of parent we're looking for, but we have a geographic definition for those parents, and we have a demographic definition for those parents. People who care about the environment. So yes, that is somewhat poorly defined. It's certainly better than people or everybody, but care about is a very amorphous term. Now, I know I can slide this over somehow. There it is. Here's one that y'all think is well defined. Oh yeah, farmers with at least 180 acres of land that they own in an area with frequent flooding and low land lease rates. Thank you for recognizing that's a very good audience definition. That's what I'm working with one of our clients. We spent our first 6 months of work together figuring out that the farmers we want to reach meet these criteria. Instead of every farmer in the state, for our program, we want to reach the ones who have at least 180 acres, are in a flood-prone area, and can lease land at a low rate. So anyway, that gives you a sense of it. Small business owners, somewhat poorly defined, so many different kinds of businesses with so many different needs. The more precisely you can define your audience, the better you can figure out how to reach them. And this is a chart on how we're going to measure that. Part 2 of this training, if you enjoy this training, let the host know, and maybe they'll bring us back for part 2, and we'll go into a lot more depth on that. So now let's talk about that next item on the slope, the impressions. That next thing that happens after you've defined your audience to farmers with 180 acres in flood-prone areas with low lease rates, now you want to get their attention, and that's where the impressions come in. Now, this is a term of art that we use. It's an umbrella term. It covers all the different ways that we could try to reach someone. Email, postcards, post on online groups, billboards by the side of the road, newspaper articles, Facebook ads, door hangers, tables at community events. All of those things are examples of an impression, a message that is put out there in front of your audience in some form or some fashion, which you've chosen for whatever reason that you've chosen. It's a category term. It's an umbrella term. These are a few examples of what that means. And here's one of the basic principles about the impressions from the marketing industry. It's almost always better to reach 25 people 4 times each than 100 people 1 time only. So much of the work that we do with our clients is about defining that audience and making that audience smaller and smaller and smaller so we can reach them more and more and more often. Let's just go back to that farmer. That client is in Pennsylvania, and there are 65,000 farmers in the state of Pennsylvania. We found 3,000 farmers who have at least 180 acres of land in flood-prone areas where the lease rates are low. I took that audience, we worked with the client to take the audience from 60,000 to 3,000, because with our budget, we can reach 3,000 farmers many, many, many times, but we could reach 60,000 farmers once or twice. Smaller numbers of people that you reach more and more often are generally a better use of your time and your money than the biggest audience possible. Now, we use a lot of math, and there's your next exercise coming up. This is when the calculators are going to get busted out. We use a lot of math with the impressions and then the conversions that come from that. This will make a lot of sense in a minute, so just don't worry that you got to get it right the first time. Conversions divided by impressions times 100% is your response rate. So 24 divided by 1,000 times 100% is 2.4%. Why do you care? Well, I'm going to make that clear over the next few minutes, but I promise you that you do. But we'll start by doing a simple math exercise, and I am going to put you into the breakout rooms for this. If you look in the chat, here it comes. Here's what it's going to look like. Oops, that's the wrong one. Hang on. This is the right one. Look in the chat. I just gave you a corrected link. So here's the formula. I see here someone requested the formula. I put it right into the exercise. Here's your example. I mailed 500 fundraising letters. I got 9 donations. 9 divided by 500 is 0.018. 0.018 times 100% is 1.8%. My response rate is 1.8%. I'm going to put you into the breakout rooms for a few minutes, and you've got some examples. I want you to do that math. And once you've kind of gotten the hang of doing that math, I'm going to work with you to illustrate why this basic level of math is super important for conducting successful outreach. So here we go back into the breakout rooms for 5 minutes.
One.
Welcome back, everybody. All right, so let's see a little bit about what you came up with. And here's the first example. You called 50 people to ask them come out for a volunteer event. 16 showed up. What was your response rate? 32% is what everybody's coming up with. 16 out of 50 is a 32% response rate. And that's an example of high bang, high buck outreach. Takes a lot of time to call 50 people on the phone. That's hard work. But a 32% response rate is really good. High bang, high buck outreach gets you your highest rates of response. This woman says, let me tell you about this great thing I tried. Who's ever on the other end of the phone, there's a really good chance they will try it too. This young lady right here has wrapped her arms around her two buddies and says, hey guys, I need a favor. Odds are these guys are going to say yes to whatever the favor is. When we're talking about high touch, high bang, high buck outreach, we can expect response rates in the double digits, 10%, 20%, 30%. And after 2 or 3 times, if they haven't responded, they're not gonna.
What's the typical response rate for cold calling?
I'm going to get to that right next. Thank you for the segue. So here was the next answer that I had you look at. You emailed 1,000 people asking them to sign a petition to a county council. 57 of them signed. What was your response rate? 5.7%. And I would call that middle bang, middle buck. Responses are in the single digits. It's a lot easier to email 1,000 people than it is to call 50 people. Calling 50 people is a lot harder than emailing 1,000 people. But email doesn't work quite as well. Middle bang, middle buck. These search ads that appear when you do a search, 1, 2, 3, 4%. Door hangers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5%. Direct mail, 0.5%, 2% maybe, 3% if you're doing really good. Cold calling, 1, 2%. Blast email, 3, 4% thereabouts. All kind of middle of the road, single-digit response rates for this kind of outreach. The message goes straight to the person, but it is not personal in any way. Impersonal but direct. We call this direct marketing in my business, by the way. Middle bang, middle buck. All of these things are a lot less labor intensive than reaching out personally in some way, but then they also don't work quite as well. Now, the last example that I gave you here was we promoted a workshop in the newspaper. 14 people showed up. "14 people out of 15,000 is 0.09%. That means that 14,986 people who read that newspaper did not show up, and 14 people did. We call that low bang, low buck. Getting something in the newspaper is a lot easier than the other things that we discussed, but then the rate of response is very low. Low bang, low buck. all of your mass media stuff falls into this low bang, low buck category. If you get something on the radio, if you're using a billboard, if you have something on Craigslist or something in the newspaper, you get an ad on Facebook, or you put a brochure on a rack or a poster on the wall, all of these kinds of things, you potentially can reach a whole lot of people, but the vast majority of them are going to ignore it. So it's low effort to reach a lot of people, relatively low cost if you divide that cost among how many people that you reach, but the rates of response are very low. Fractions of a percent. Fractions of a percent with brochures and on the rack and posters on the wall. Fractions of a percent with something on social media. Fractions of a percent in the newspaper. Fractions of a percent on the radio. Fractions of a percent on the with all of these. And so here's what's the practical upshot of all of that. Here's your big takeaway. Depending on the size of the audience you are trying to reach, some outreach techniques are going to be a better fit than others. If your audience is in the dozens, if you have a small audience in the dozens, then high bang, high buck, person to person, highly personal outreach is the only way you're really going to be successful with such a small audience. If your audience is in the hundreds or the thousands, then you're going to be most likely to get your success through mid-bang, mid-buck kinds of things. Email blasts, direct mail, social media groups, phone banks, those kinds of things, if your audience is in the hundreds or in the thousands. And if your audience is in the tens of thousands or higher, that would be low bang, low buck. Yeah, that's where you're going to reach a whole lot of people, way more than you could ever email or mail to or call, but then the response rate is going to be pretty similar.
Could you describe what phone banks is and how it differs from the telephone?
I'm sorry, can you say that again? You're a little muffled.
I'm sorry, what is a phone bank?
A phone bank is if you round up a bunch of volunteers and give them a list and they all call.
Okay. Thank you.
But the person who receives the call doesn't know the person who's making the call.
Got it.
Yeah, that's a key difference. It's not the phone. It's does the person receiving the call have a relationship with the person who is placing the call? That makes all the difference. And I got to be honest, you know, as these guys right here start to have their spam checkers and all that kind of stuff, the phone bank cold calling business is going into the toilet. We've never had a whole lot of luck with it over here at Waterwords, and it's just getting worse. We generally do not recommend that our clients try this. But now if it's personal and the person calling has a relationship with the person receiving the call, that's different. But if it's a cold call of any kind, whether it's paid or volunteer, not happening anymore. So here's how you can imagine that. I'm going to put let's put a more of a conservation spin on it. This is a workshop for a pesticide buffer, protecting natural resources in Oregon. It's about agricultural practice that keeps waterways clean. If there were 100 farmers within 20 miles of this workshop, we would love to have all 100 of them show up, wouldn't we? So we call 100 farmers on the phone. High bang, high buck. We've been working in the farm community. We call them all on the phone. We get a 32% response rate, and 32 farmers show up. Isn't that fabulous? We'd be so excited to have 32 farmers show up for our workshop. Well, we don't have time to call 100 farmers. So we email 100 farmers. And we get a 5.7% response rate, which is typical for email. And now what do we get? 5 or 6 farmers show up. That's much less successful. And the only difference is that we switched from calling them to emailing them. We don't have email addresses for all the 100 farmers, so we put something in the newspaper. And now we get a 0.09% response rate, and nobody shows up. And these kinds of things happen a lot in our community, and I've been in countless meetings where we would put something in the newspaper trying to reach a very small audience. We'd have a very disappointing outcome, and then we would start asking all these wrong questions like, oh, farmers don't hate us, they hate us, or maybe we picked the wrong day, or maybe we should have offered food, or we go through all these things that went wrong, but we never ask ourselves, did we promote this workshop the right way? Did we pick the right promotional methods for the size of the audience that we were trying to reach? Did we match our choice to the audience? If your audience is small, only 100, it's going to be hard to succeed without some of that high bang, high buck outreach. But then I also see the mistake go the other way. Here we see that there's a park referendum coming up. The voters are going to vote to put money into the parks. And these guys are out working at some kind of an event. We talked to 35 voters today about the park referendum. Sounds great. Until you do the math. Just 47,000 more voters to talk to before the election next week. These guys spent the whole day. They talked to a few dozen voters, and there are tens of thousands that they didn't reach. This kind of large audience, 321, that calls for low bang, low buck outreach to try and reach a very large number of people. Different types of impressions are suited for different types of audiences, and one of the key differences is the size, because to reach a very large audience, you must be very efficient, and to reach a very small audience, you must be very effective. Now, this kind of outreach is super measurable. You can measure the number of emails you sent, measure the number of phone calls you placed, measure the number of cars that drove past your billboard, measure the number of times your ad was seen online. These are very measurable features. And if you can measure how many times your message went out and measure how many responses you got, now you're starting to learn real useful stuff. So now let's talk about the conversions. It takes a lot of impressions to get a few conversions. And a conversion is an umbrella term. It covers a lot of different things. Maybe they're RSVPing for an event. Maybe they're signing a petition. Maybe they're signing up to volunteer. Maybe they're subscribing for your newsletter. Maybe they're making a donation to your nonprofit organization, or they're taking a pledge to do something good for the river, or they're applying for a permit, or they're entering a contest. All of these things are examples of a conversion. They see the message, they respond to the message, and you know about it. And here's some examples. This is a rain barrel workshop, river cleanup form. So here's the river cleanup registration form, and it's online. Here's the paper registration form, or here you can just email Tammy at this organization to sign up for your event. Either way, they are converting, because when they fill out this form, the village of Menominee Falls knows about it. If someone turns in this piece of paper, Virginia Tech Cooperative Extension knows about it. Here we have it on kind of the advocacy side. This is a petition. Tell Congress don't cut funds for clean water. You fill out this form, and this organization knows about it. Here's a paper petition. You sign that petition, these guys know about it. Here's a telephone one, don't call Social Security, call this number. You call this number, the organizers know about it. Here it is again for donation. Paper donation form, online donation form, donation hotline. However they respond to the message, the sponsors here know about it. Now, John Wanamaker is famous for saying, I know that half my advertising is wasted. I just don't know which half. That's where the conversion comes in. He wants to know how well things work. The conversions tell him that, and he always tries to figure out how they heard about us. How did your customer, how did your advocate, how did your donor, how did your volunteer hear about it? And you can measure these things as well. You can count how many people converted, count which type of impression they converted from, how many of them agreed to hear future messages from you. But once they've converted, once they've donated, once they've volunteered, once they signed your petition, once they attended your event, once they participated in your contest, once they took your pledge, whatever that thing is, they're expecting you to stay in touch with them, which is the cultivation. And what this chart shows you is that most of them will agree to be cultivated, not all of them, but most of them. Cultivation is an umbrella term, just like impression, just like conversion. It might be a receipt. It could be a follow-up survey. It could be a thank you note. It could be social media updates. You mail them a newsletter. You send them the annual report. You send them photos of the event. You send them an invitation to the next event. All of these things are cultivation, trying to stay in touch with those people who've gotten involved with you for the very first time. And if you are prompt and thoughtful in your cultivation, that feels like good customer service. If there's delayed cultivation or no cultivation, that feels like poor customer service. If you are excessive in your cultivation, well, that feels like spam or harassment. Now, my experience with the conservation community is that we are so worried about harassing and spamming our audience that we often end up not following up with them soon enough or often enough, and then they forget about us. We are so worried about overdoing it that, in fact, we underdo it. That's what I tend to assume is going on with most of our clients until we get to know them and learn that occasionally it is the other way around. But that is usually what's going on. So now if you're going to cultivate, you got to stay in touch with people, and that requires some kind of a tool, like a sign-in sheet, a spreadsheet, an email blast program, or a full-on database. So that's going to bring us to our final exercise here, which is the big steps. Why do we go through all this trouble? To define the audience? That's hard. That's probably the hardest. Getting our message to them in all these different ways. Setting up some kind of a conversion that they can get involved for the first time. Storing their information in some kind of paper spreadsheet, a database, something. Staying in touch with them so that they form a relationship with us. And then we move on to the big things that really help our organizations be successful. Big things like putting a conservation easement on their land, visiting an elected official for you, installing a BMP on their property, making a big volunteer commitment, making a big donation, changing the way they run their farm, joining your board of directors, introducing you to their rich friends who might also make donations. people aren't generally going to do these big things. They're not generally going to do these big things without all of this leading up to it first. Somehow they've got to get in touch. They've got to hear from you. They've got to fall into your communication clutches, and they've got to like the way you stay in touch, the right amount of staying in touch, what you tell them when you stay in touch. And if they like all of these things, then these big things are on the table. And that's going to bring us to our closing exercise. This closing exercise is intended to reveal the important role of databases and CRMs. And Rabina, if you'll remind me of your question after we complete this exercise. And basically, here's how it works. Let's imagine we are a well-run nonprofit organization. We are crackerjack. We know what we are doing. We have a very good database. And along the way, we have recruited these 5 vintage cartoon characters to become supporters or involved with our organization in some way. And what you're going to see is their hypothetical database field. We've got Fred Flintstone, Jane Jetson, Betty Boop, Wonder Woman, and Fat Albert. And we know a lot about them. We know how we got them involved. We know what their involvement with us has been. And we're going to now use this information that we've been collecting to try and get them to do big things for our organization. And here is what that's going to look like. We're going to click Next. So here's the first database record for Fred Flintstone. There's his name, there's his email, there's his address. Here's how he got involved in our organization, some summaries of his involvement, and I want you to answer some basic questions about him. How did Fred first get involved with the organization? Rate Fred on the following criteria. Responding to messages. Does he have a strong history of responding to messages? Some history of responding to messages, no history of responding to messages, or do we somehow not know that? Does he participate in our activities? Is he interested in our mission? Does he have a history of volunteering, donating, et cetera, et cetera? And how well has the organization kept notes about this supporter? You're going to do this for all 5 of these people, and then at the end, you're going to try and figure out which of them is going to be the best candidate for some really important work on behalf of your organization. So Gareth asked, what is a BMP? Yeah, that's a best management practice. It's a pollution control measure on a piece of land is basically what that is. So you've got the link, and now I'm going to put you into the breakout rooms, and I'm going to give you 10 minutes to do this exercise.
Eric? We can't hear you.
How about now?
Yes.
Okay, great. Sorry about that. So we've got just a couple of minutes left, and it doesn't look like people were able to finish that exercise. Hopefully you got far enough to see that by tracking the information of these incoming individuals who had responded to our message, gotten involved with our organization, we kept track of their involvement. That's giving us the intel on who might be a good candidate for some of these roles that we might hope they would step up to. So let's see if anybody wants to make the case for which of these 5 individuals would be the best choice to host a fundraising dinner for our organization at their home. Anybody want to drop something in the chat? Okay, so Georgina said Jane Jetson. Why do you think Jane Jetson would be our best track or best shot?
It's similar to what she's already done in terms of the annual dinner.
Similar to her involvement in the annual dinner. Great, let's do one more. If we wanted to ask one of these people to meet with the state senator about the environmental budget, which of these 5 would maybe be our best choice? So Jimena, did I say that right? Says Fred. Why Fred?
Yes, you said that right. And because he's been to hearings in the past, I think he's the only one that I remember with any kind of leaning like that, like that kind of interest.
You're correct, Jimena. He is the only one who has shown any interest in the political process at all. And as Holly noted, Wonder Woman has said, I'm a federal employee. I want to stay clear of being associated with any of that stuff. So because they have kept good records about these folks, they do have a clue on who might be good to ask for this role and who they would want to avoid asking for this role. So this brings us to the end of the time, and Isabel is probably going to pull out the hook in just a second. I'll pause right now and take any questions. There was one question about if we had a recommendation for a CRM system, and the short answer is no, we don't. There are so many different CRM databases. That's what this exercise is about on the market, that we couldn't possibly keep track of all of the options, but there are specialists who work with nonprofit organizations to help them select the best possible CRM for their needs. I am not qualified to do that. I'll open the floor for any other questions or any other comments that you may have. Well, hearing none, thank you all so much for your time this afternoon. I really enjoyed participating in your conference, and I wish you all the best of luck. I hope to see you in person at an event like this sometime soon, because as much as we've tried to make the Zoom experience pretty good, there's just nothing quite like all being in the room together. Isabel, thank you for being our host and troubleshooter for all of this, and best of luck to all of you going forward.
Thanks very much, Eric. And thanks to everybody for joining us. And our next session starts at 3 o'clock. Make sure to tune in. It's on water quality, but also designing for co-benefits. So how can we kill 2 birds with 1 stone when you're designing for water quality projects, and what else can you accomplish there? So make sure to tune into that. It's back on the Whova platform. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you.